Several months ago, part of the process of me coming to ETCA was started out from a consulting standpoint. I do consulting for Christian schools, and we were talking with the board and with Wayne at the time about strategic planning and just creating a long-term vision for ETCA and where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do and who we wanted to be. And so as we went through the process of me coming on board and being a part of ETCA, that was one of our goals, was to create this long-range vision for ETCA. And so we've been spending this past several months of really working in this vision and trying to figure out where God is leading us and what God's calling us to do. We've had a lot of conversations with community leaders across the area. We've had surveys that we've sent out to our families, to community leaders, to church leaders, to past board members, to our faculty and staff, getting input and getting feedback from them, and just to see where God was leading us in this direction. And so through this process, we came up with this new tagline. It says, "A distinctively different Christian leadership academy." And that's really going to kind of sum up what we're going to talk about tonight and kind of the result of this strategic planning process that we've been through. Now, to start from the very beginning, we're going to start in Genesis, which is the very beginning. In the first book of the Bible, when God created man, He created each one of us, and our sole purpose is to serve Him. And that's why we exist. That's why God created us, is because He wants us to serve Him in every aspect of our life. And the other part of this creation mandate and why God created us is He also wants us to care for and to take care of His creation. The things that He has created in the world, He gives us responsibility over that. And He's made each one of us, whether we know it or not, a leader in many different ways. Whether it's to lead your family, to lead in the church community, to lead for a cause or whatever. But He's got this creation here, and He wants us to lead and influence and oversee this. That's who we are, and that's in our DNA. So because of that, we felt like there was a strong need to really develop leadership within our students, to help them really become what God has called them to be as leaders, and to fulfill the purpose of why God created them, just like He created you and me. And so through this process, we've come up with this, we feel like God is calling us to be the premier leadership school in this state. And that's a pretty bold statement. It's a very bold statement, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over the course of several years. But we really feel like this is where God's calling us to be. And there's every school and every Christian school, every private school, public school, charter school, talks about leadership with their students. And they do great jobs with leadership in their schools and in their programs. But only about 20% of schools in the United States really intentionally focus on leadership and leadership training with their students in a comprehensive way. We feel like where God is kind of leading us to, and where the direction God's taking us to, I don't know of any other school that's going to do it the way we do it. I think we're that cutting edge. And I would love to be able to say that this was my idea or this was the board's idea. This was really from seeking and searching and finding out what God wants us to do. And so this is God's vision. And He's just given me the privilege to be a part of it. And given everyone here who's associated with ETCA the privilege of being a part of it. So let me kind of outline this for you this evening. We're going to start out with kind of how we came about to this and some philosophy behind why we feel like this is what God's calling us to do. We'll talk a little bit about the need for it, and then we'll kind of talk about some specific things of what we're going to do. First of all, let's start with what we believe. First of all, we believe that as a school, the ETCA is being called to be, first and foremost, a school. That's what we are. We are in the education business. That's what we're called to do, and we're not a church, we're not a service organization, we're a school. We're in this business to educate kids. And so we feel like our role in that aspect of it is to bring students to a level where they can compete in the marketplace of ideas, where they can stand toe-to-toe academically and succeed academically and be ahead of their counterparts academically. But if we just impart knowledge, then we're really not doing our job. Any school can impart knowledge. Google can impart knowledge. It's that simple these days in the information world that we live in. So at the heart of what we've always done and tried to do is to essentially bring purpose to this knowledge, to create a biblical worldview and to give a biblical worldview account of why this is the way it is. This is why the world is the way it is, because God created it this way, and this is how he put it all together and made it work. So with this knowledge, we have to provide purpose and meaning behind that knowledge of why God has done this. And so that's at the heart of who we are as a Christian school. And most Christian schools follow the same line. But the third concept of this that we feel like we believe that we're being called to do is this idea of leadership. Not only do we need to train our students academically, and not only do we need to create purpose and give them purpose behind these academics, but we need to give them a place of influence. So that when they go out into the world and they're standing toe-to-toe and competing in this marketplace of ideas and standing on this truth that God has given them and knowledge of this knowledge that they've given them, that he's given them, that they have a place of influence, that they are looked up to by their peers, that they're respected by their peers. And we feel that is important in training leadership principles. Now, ETCA is going to focus on leadership at several different levels. Of course, we're going to focus at it at the student level, but we're also going to focus at it at the board level. We've recently had a board training focusing on this idea of board leadership starting at the top, and this concept of leadership starting at the very top of the organization and then filtering down. We're working on it at the administrative level. Our admin team has been working on studying and developing leadership principles. Right now we're going through Nehemiah, and it's packed full of leadership principles as we study Hand Me Another Brick by Chuck Swindoll. And there's some rich, important leadership things that are in that we're studying and we're learning and we're growing as an administrative team. But we also have to train our faculty and staff to be leaders as well too, because we're not only asking them to be leaders themselves, but we're asking them to impart and teach leadership principles to our students. So we have two areas here. We have to focus on making sure our faculty and staff have the leadership tools that they need to build themselves in their own personal life. But we also have to make sure that we build these leadership principles within our students, and it filters down, and our faculty is the one that's going to be really touching them and teaching that to them. So we also want to provide resources and focus on leadership development even in the community. Use the skill sets that we have to help build a strong community in Tyler, Texas of leaders as we bring leaders up to hopefully move back into the community, be a part of the community, and be leaders in the community themselves. And we also feel like we have a unique skill set of being able to provide leadership resources to our churches in the area as well too. But we also feel like, and this is interesting because as I've been in education for almost 20 years now, but the education world today is almost just as important that we educate our parents as much as we educate our kids. There are parents that are just struggling on how to be parents. And we feel like our role as from a leadership level is to teach our parents how to lead their kids. And so we're going to be providing resources for that as well too. Now, in order to accomplish this, we will focus our efforts on two key leadership principles. First and foremost, we're going to go back to the creation mandate that says that as leaders, we were created not to serve ourselves, but to serve God. And so our focus is going to be on as we develop leadership, is develop our students to learn that they don't serve themselves, they serve a greater God. And then also the next principle is that leadership begins and ends at the feet of Jesus. And that the ultimate act of leadership is Jesus sacrificing himself, God sacrificing his son to die and rise again for our sins on the cross. Now, we have a leadership, a vision scripture that we've chosen for this new vision. It's Matthew chapter 5, verse 14 through 16. It says, "You are a light that gives light to the world. A city that is built on a hill cannot be hidden, and people don't hide a light under a bowl. They put it on a lampstand so the light shines for all the people in the house. In the same way, you should be a light for other people. Live so that we will see the good things you do and will praise your Father in heaven." Now, I'm going to come back to that in just a little bit, and you'll see why we've chosen that to be our leadership scripture. Now, as an institution, we have a mission statement, and that mission statement kind of tells us as an organization, as East Texas Christian Academy, who we are and what we want to do and what we want to accomplish. So as we're exploring this idea of leadership, we had to really ask ourselves, okay, is this idea of leadership really going to fit into what we're trying to do? Does it fit into our mission? And so our mission is that East Texas Christian Academy's mission is to provide academics that equip every child with the education and biblical knowledge, character building and training that enhances the uniqueness of each student, and excellence in all we do for the glory of God. So I want to break this mission statement down a second and just show you how, from a leadership level, we're hoping to fulfill our mission through this. Let's start with academics. ETCA is going to revamp our curriculum, guys, to integrate leadership into every class. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more in a moment. But we feel like, from a leadership standpoint, that it's important, at least just for time's sake, we'll talk about the core classes tonight. We want our students to develop leadership skills so that when they study English and language arts, that they're not only studying knowledge and literature and grammar and things like that, but they're learning to influence, learn how to influence others in communication. They're learning those skills of being an influence to others as they communicate to others. In mathematics, we want our students to have influence in creativity, in design, in learning and understanding the order of things. In history, we want our students to influence future events and the culture that we live in based on what they learn from past experiences. We want to bring those together. We don't want to just teach them past events without teaching them and showing them how they can be influential later on down the road. And then in science, we want to make sure that our students have an influence in the preservation of life in the world that we live in, that they understand this creation that God has created for us, and they understand the importance of it and how they can preserve life and help mankind through science and be an influence in those areas. Now let's talk about character. If you know anything about leadership, or you've done any studying on leadership and leadership development, there's a lot of theories out there. But one of the main theories that you'll see, and one of the key components in almost every theory you see, is that character is at the very top of leadership development. That's almost mutually agreed on by every theory that I've ever seen on leadership. That character is the key foundation for leadership development. So this idea of fulfilling and creating character within our kids through leadership is a perfect fit. We want our students to learn through leadership how to move away from the flesh, which tells us to serve ourselves, and move towards serving God. We want to help our children. We want to help prepare our children for the path that they're going to be on, the path that God has set for them, with all the bumps and all the curves, and not try to prepare the path of the child and take those curves and those bumps away from them. We want to walk them through those, through leadership, and learn how to do things the hard way and how to be difficult. There's a lot of schools that will not push your child to do the hard things. ETCA is not one of them. We're going to challenge our kids. We're going to push them to think outside the box. We're going to push them to get out of their comfort zone, because we want to get them ready for the path that God has placed them on. And if you read any of the Gospels, if you read any of the Bible, you're going to see the paths that the apostles were on. It was not an easy path. Jesus didn't pave a smooth path for them to go down. He gave them and got them ready for a very difficult path, and that's what we want to do with our students. And then the third thing is we want to push our students to step away and get out of their comfortable life and learn to invest in others. If you'll notice this idea of character, when we talk about investing in others and serving God, that's the Great Commission. And that's not by chance. Because if we're going to build character and leadership in our students, it all starts with the Great Commission. Because Christ said on everything else hinges off of this. And so that's what we're going to really focus on in building character within our students. The third thing in our mission statement is excellence. And we want to make sure that we're doing things in excellence in everything that we do. We're going to be pushing and challenging our students in all aspects of their lives, not just in school. We want them to be pursuing excellence in their personal lives, in their churches, outside of our classroom walls. We want to push them to continually strive and learn in academics, even after they're out of school, because we feel like leadership and understanding true leadership development means that you're a lifelong learner, that you're always striving to improve yourself and get better. We want to push our students to develop responsibility and improve their organizational skills and learn time management skills. We want to challenge them to do that and to help them through that process. And we want to push our students to develop soft skills, and this is what businesses are screaming for. I've been in so many education business meetings where we sit there and we say, okay, as an educational institution, what do you need as a business? What kind of employees what can we do to help make your employees better as they come out of our school? And they almost always say, I just want them to talk on the phone. I just want them to be able to have a conversation with a customer and speak face to face with someone and learn those soft skills and those people skills. And we're going to be pushing our students to do that. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit more on how we're going to do that in a little bit. The next thing is that we feel like our ETCA's leadership initiative will not only help your child get scholarships and get admitted to the college of their choice and get the job they want, but it's going to help establish a place of influence that's going to give them a platform to proclaim the gospel of Christ. And that's what it's all about right there. In essence, what we're doing is we're preparing our kids to be a city on a hill and a light unto the world, which takes us right back to our vision scripture in Matthew. We want our kids to be seen and recognized and to have that platform and be a light unto the world. Now, let me talk a little bit about some of the leadership programs that we're going to be putting together and that we're going to be organizing. The first thing we decided we needed to do was hire a director of leadership programs, and we've already done that. We did it in-house. Nathan Grounds, who has been our spiritual life director for the past several years, is now going to transition into a role of director of leadership programs at ETCA. We've already been in conversations about that, and we've already been visiting some schools that do leadership training with their students, and we're getting ideas and been formulating this long-term vision of what we're wanting to do with our student leadership programs. And from that, we're going to create a summer camp for community children. It's going to be a leadership camp. We're going to have our high school kids put this thing together, organize it, teach them leadership skills through that whole process, invite community children in, and then teach them leadership principles as well, and all coming from our high school students. We're going to expand our Character Counts program, which is a program that already exists at ETCA, and we're going to expand that to enhance and develop leadership in early grades, because remember what I said, character is going to be at the root of leadership. So if we're going to begin teaching our kids leadership at an early age, it's going to have to start with character, and we can build those leadership principles off of that Character Counts initiative. And then to help make the transition before we get to our high school program, we're looking at partnering with an organization called Growing Leaders with Dr. Tim Elmore. Dr. Elmore has worked with professional teams and college teams. He's worked with the University of Texas football team. He's worked with several baseball teams, including the 2 teams in the World Series this past year, the Philadelphia Phillies and the Kansas City Royals, developing leadership with them. He's got a book out called Generation IY, which is a great book. I would recommend it. And then he's also got a series called Habitudes, where he takes leadership, visuals of leadership, and he creates leadership principles through these visual pictures. For example, I was recently at a conference where he spoke, and he was talking about, it was a picture of a person behind a dashboard in a car. You could see the windshield, and you could see this rearview mirror, and he called it Windshields and Rearview Mirrors. Pretty original title. But through this idea is you always want to focus and look at where you're going. You only want to glance at what's behind you. Because if you spend too much time looking at what's behind you in the rearview mirror, you're going to veer off and have a wreck. So you always want to keep looking ahead and moving so you can move forward, but continue to glance at what's behind you. And so, and he's got many, many more examples of that, but that's going to be kind of the program we're going to be doing at the middle school level. At the high school level, we're going to be really stepping it up a notch. We're going to create a program called Panther Leadership Academy, which each student that wants to participate in this, if they want to be in a leadership role at ETCA, they're going to have to go through this process of applying to Panther Leadership Academy. They'll fill out an application, they'll set goals for themselves, they'll set goals for their school, what they want to accomplish in the next 3 to 4 years that they're going to be there, and what they want to accomplish. And then they will fill that out in this application process, and then they will meet with business leaders, hopefully business leaders like you in this room right here, that will interview them. They'll have to dress up just like they're on a regular interview process. They will have to call and schedule the interview themselves, and then if they're not dressed up, or they didn't follow through, or they missed their appointment, they have to call and reschedule, or you as an interviewer, or the person that's interviewing them will say, you didn't dress up for the interview. We'll have to reschedule. So we're going to push them to keep moving and keep pushing forward. And we're helping them through this process. We're not teaching them to fail. We're helping them through this and helping them to move forward by rescheduling and doing these types of things. So that's what you have to do to get involved in that. And then through the interview process, you have to start answering and saying, okay, well, now how exactly are you going to accomplish this goal right here? It's a little bit broad and a little bit vague. Give me some specifics. So you push them and start getting them to think, okay, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to overcome this obstacle right here? And then you kind of help them through that process. And then we look at it the next year and say, okay, how far are you along with your goal? How far have you accomplished on this? Have you done anything on it yet? Are you behind? Are you ahead? Those types of things. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to partner with an organization called Student Leadership University. This is headed up by a man named Dr. Jay Streck, who is also very well known in the corporate world in leadership training. He's taught at a lot of corporations. He also does professional basketball teams, partners with them, and does a lot of leadership training with them as well too. He has developed this organization called Student Leadership University, and it's called SLU 101. It's a 4-year program. SLU 101 starts in San Antonio, where the students come and they can be a part of that. It's about a 3 to 4 day process, and they hear from speakers, corporate speakers, say speakers from Chick-fil-A, executives from Chick-fil-A. They hear from people like Pat Williams, who's the general manager of Orlando Magic. Hear from leading apologists like Sean McDowell. Many people come in and speak to them. They take notes. They have a syllabus. We get back with them and we visit with them at the end of the day and reinforce these principles that they've heard throughout the day. And it's not church camp. It's not a summer camp. It's an intense leadership training experience. And they go through that in San Antonio. But it's a phenomenal experience. I've seen it happen. I've seen the kids respond to it as they've been pushed and challenged. Then the next year they go to SLU 201, which is in Washington, D.C., where they actually meet with leaders from Congress. They meet with the White House press secretary. They meet with the White House chaplain. They see all the sights, and they learn how Christianity, how this country is built on Christian values and Christian principles, and how even though today those Christians who are in government and representatives are struggling to preserve their Christianity and still lead in an effective way, and how they do that, and how they can and pass on those principles to our kids. Then after SLU 201, they go to SLU 301, which is in London and Paris and Normandy and Oxford. And they hear from people like Winston Churchill's grandson, who talks to them and who's a member of parliament and talks to them about leadership. They hear from leading apologists like John Lennox, who's debated Stephen Hawking and who's a professor at Oxford. They sit on the beaches of Normandy and hear the experiences and the struggle that Dwight D. Eisenhower had as he was the night before preparing and getting ready for the invasion of Normandy. And you're right there on the beaches where it all happened. Visiting Pointe du Hoc and the cemetery, the U.S. military cemetery in Normandy. And all those rich, neat experiences. And then the last one is SLU 401, where they go to Israel. And they visit all the places where Jesus visited. And they are baptized in the Jordan River, and they get to go out on the Sea of Galilee, and they get to visit Jesus' tomb, and they get to ride camels into Petra, which is kind of a cool deal. It's only one way in, one way out, and if you want to get there fast, you can go on a camel. If you want to get there that's not quite so smelly and stinky, you walk in. But it's an incredible experience for them through this 4-year program. And then we also want to continue to develop our athletic programs with a program called LAST, Leadership and Sports Training. That's a program that I have started several years ago, and Chad has helped me out with on several things, as well as many other athletes. And we're going to continue to develop that. We've been doing that at ETCA since school started. So those are a few of the leadership programs. Now, let me talk a little bit more about some other areas that we want to really focus on within our programs. We want to develop leadership principles that drive all of our extracurricular programs, whether it's sports, band, anything outside the classroom. We're still going to be putting these leadership principles and instilling those in all of our programs, because none of our programs is the engine that drives our train. They're important cars and pieces of the train, but they're not going to drive our train. Our vision and our mission is what drives our train. But we're going to make sure that we integrate this not only in the classroom, but in every aspect of what we do, in every way that we touch kids. We want to develop leadership programs that provide resources for parents. I mentioned that a second ago, and training and teaching parents how to be leaders as their kids are growing up. We're going to provide staff development that's based on leadership in the classroom, and we want to provide leadership resources to the church community, and we want to link community leaders like yourself to our students so that you can mentor them and help develop leadership in them as well too. Now, in this strategic planning process, we also went through several other things as well too that we kind of felt like we needed to bolster and boost up to help support this leadership program. So let me talk to you a little bit about academic enhancements. We're in the process right now of doing a comprehensive review and overhaul of our current curriculum. We're looking at different gaps between grade levels, filling those gaps, creating a consistent curriculum all the way across the board. And we're going to break it up into 3 areas. First, we're going to have our academic standards that we want to hold our kids to academically so that they are ready at an academic level. But we also are going to, within our curriculum and our guidelines, we're going to be looking at ways that we infuse that biblical integration in there and that teaching that biblical worldview. And it's going to be more than just stapling a scripture onto a lesson that may or may not have a connection. You know, you can take a cake and you can put icing on the top of it and sweeten it up a little bit, but it doesn't change the ingredients in the cake. We're going to put this stuff in the batter. We're going to work it in, and it's going to be part of it. That's what we're going to do with biblical integration in our classroom. And so that's going to be another key component of our curriculum guides. The third component is going to be that leadership component and leadership principles that go along and fit with the lessons that provide meaning and provide influence in how our students can take the information they've gathered, the purpose behind that information that they have, and now how can they use it in the world. and influence others in the world. We're also taking an aggressive approach on updating our curriculum resources. We're going to put things on a schedule to make sure that we've got the most updated resources available, to make sure that we have the resources we need to fulfill what our curriculum guides are saying. And then we want to have each one of our teachers at ETCA to have not just a textbook that goes home to the students, a classroom set of textbooks, and a teacher's guide that goes along with that textbook, but we want them to have 3 to 5 different resources that go along with that textbook that help give them more fulfillment and body to help accomplish all the things that we need to have. So we want to give them all the resources and the tools they need so they can teach our kids. The next thing we want to do is look at our facility enhancements. Now, we want to continue plans for the development of a permanent elementary building that will also house a gymnasium and a cafeteria, but we don't want to do that right now. We feel like right now if we do that, it's going to put a strain on our budget, but when we reach 400 students, we feel like we can financially afford to maintain a facility like that. Excuse me. So when we reach 400 students, we're going to be working on building that new facility and bringing that new facility to ETCA. That'll be more permanent and give us more room and space. We also feel like we should create an overall site plan that will be drawn up by an architect and an engineer. That's going to help us with the development of our overall property with steps and phases for completion so that we have a good, clear picture and idea of what we want to do over the next 5 to 10 years and what we want ETCA to look like from a facility standpoint over the next 5 to 10 years. And then we want to continue developing a strategic plan and successful annual fund plan that's going to help increase relationships in the donor base. So as we have to get to the point of building a new facility, we're going to have to raise capital for that. And we're going to have to probably launch a capital campaign. But we want to build our donor base and create and prepare ourselves, because if we were to do it right now, we're not ready from a development standpoint to be able to do that. So we're going to build on that so that we are ready and preparing ourselves when we hit that 400 mark. And the next thing we need to do is just communicate this vision to the community. We're embarking on an aggressive marketing campaign, increasing the awareness of ETCA. It's interesting how many people I've talked to that don't know that ETCA exists. And if they do, they don't know a whole lot about what ETCA does and has done. And so we're going to create a marketing campaign that's going to help us with that and help communicate our programs into the community and potential families. We want to continue developing a brand that marks ETCA so that when you see ETCA, hear the word ETCA, people know exactly what that is. Or they see our logo, they know exactly what that is. And they associate it with us. And so we become a familiar name in the community. And then we're also going to educate our families and our stakeholders on effectively communicating this vision and helping to get the word out as well too. Now, on the back of your program, you'll notice that there's a graduate profile. This graduate profile was created, and what that basically is this is what we want our seniors to look like when they graduate from ETCA. So what we're trying to do and what we're wanting to do is as our students move off into college, and we've done some research and the organizations we're partnering with, we really feel like our students will be 10 to 15 years ahead of their peers. When they walk into a college classroom, they're going to look around at the other people in the classroom, and they're going to say, they don't know this. They haven't figured this out. I learned that back when I was a sophomore. And they're going to have an advantage as they step into the college classroom. And they're going to have an advantage when they start competing for jobs as well too. And we want our kids to be 10 to 15 years ahead of their counterparts in that area. And so we created this graduate profile because essentially our graduates are our finished product. That is, as we release them into the world, we're done and we're saying this is what we tried to accomplish right here. This is what we wanted to accomplish with our graduates. And this is what we wanted them to look like. And this is the culmination of years of work that we've poured into this child. And now it's time to let them go and be leaders. And so what do we want student to look like. And that graduate profile breaks it down on what we want our students to look like. And that's what we're going to use an evaluation tool with our graduates on how well we have done with that student when they go into college. And we've broken out, if you'll notice, we've broken it down into 3 levels. The first level is academic. Academically, what we want our graduates to know, to understand, and to have, the tools we want them to have academically. We've created a list of characteristics and attributes of what we want them to look like spiritually. And we've created a list of characteristics and attributes that we want them to look like from a leadership standpoint, the tools we want them to have as they go into college. So I invite you to look that over and read that. And there are several ways that you can help us through this whole process. First of all, I really want you to pray. I want you to pray that we stay on target with God's purpose here, that we are focused in on what God is calling us to do, and that we are really tuned in to His will through this process. So please pray for us as we do this, because Satan is going to battle us at every level. We know that. And so we really covet your prayers. But if you'll notice on your table, there's some pledge cards. Small card looks a little bit like this. I want you to look at those, and there's some different areas and ways you can help us financially. There's some envelopes on the table. If you guys feel led and feel like God is calling you to do that, we invite you to just pray about how you can help ETCA through this process financially with that. And you can leave the check or the cards in the envelope. Just pray that if you want us to contact you back, especially if you're looking at doing something but you don't have a check right now, if you'll just let us know what your intentions are, put your name and information on there, then we'll contact you and follow up with you on that. But I really want to invite you to do that this evening as well too. And then I want to just thank you. I want to thank you for coming this evening. I want to thank you for hearing me speak. I know I'm not a former member of the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm not near as exciting as Chad is. And I don't speak as well as Chad. I've heard him speak before. But I do appreciate you giving me time to share my passion, and that's educating kids at ETCA to be leaders for the future. And I appreciate you giving me the time to be able to share that with you and speak that to you. And I would be glad and honored to sit down with you on a one-on-one basis and share more with you and answer any questions you may have at any time. So at this time, I would like to invite you, if you would, to welcome Chad Hennings up. Let me tell you a little bit about Chad. Most of you know that he was a 3-time Super Bowl winner, but Chad started out wrestling in Iowa. He was a state champion wrestler in Iowa, and I don't know if you know much about wrestling in Iowa, but it's very similar to football in Texas. They're rabid about the wrestlers there. And Chad was able to win the state championship there. And out of high school, his high school coach drove, it was hundreds and hundreds of miles to Colorado Springs and talked to the coach of the Air Force Academy and said, you really need to take a chance on this guy right here. I think it would benefit you to have him on your team because his coach thought that much of him and the young man that he was. And so the Air Force Academy accepted Chad, which is not an easy feat in itself to be accepted by the Air Force Academy. You have to go through recommendations, and it's a long, grueling process and very difficult to be accepted by the Air Force Academy. But he was accepted there, played football for them, was the winner of the Outland Trophy, was drafted by the Dallas Cowboys back when Tom Landry was still coaching, but he had a commitment to fill. Because when you go through the Air Force Academy, typically you have a 4-year commitment of service to your country after that. Well, Chad wanted to be a pilot. And not only was that, there were challenges within that. One of those challenges is that extends your commitment even further to the point where he was going to be about 30 years old when he got out to be drafted by a professional football team. Well, interestingly enough, and it's funny how God works in people's lives, the other challenge too was just him fitting in the plane. There were not many planes that he could fit into. And so he was fitted into an A-10 Warthog and flew missions over Iraq and through the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, Desert Storm. He's even had some hairy experiences with an engine going out over Turkey and some difficult things like that. But he also had this commitment, and he really didn't much think he was going to ever get to play football. And he was stationed at the beginning at Shepherd Air Force Base, and it was very difficult for him to be that close to Dallas and not be able to be lured into that lifestyle of wanting to play football. But he made a commitment, and he's a man of his word. And I know that because just from my dealings with Chad, his word means everything to him. And so, luckily, interestingly enough, the government did its first ever reduction in force of the military. And I was actually encouraging military personnel to get out of their commitments. So he calls up and he says, hey, he calls his agent, says, is there still interest for me to play football? And they said, well, the Cowboys own your rights. This time it's a new owner. It's Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson now. So the people that drafted him weren't even in charge anymore. And Denver was showing some interest in him, and they said, well, yeah, we'll see. I think the Cowboys will give you a try. And so he comes into Heathrow Airport, flies in from Heathrow Airport in London, where he's stationed, gets off the plane and goes out and works out for the Cowboys and has one of the best times he's ever run in the 40. And Jimmy Johnson, according to legend, looks over to Jerry and says, we're not trading him. We're keeping him. And from then on, the rest is history. He's a 3-time Super Bowl winner, played for 9 years for the Cowboys, has retired from that, is now a successful businessman, has had articles featured in Forbes magazine that he's written. He works in commercial real estate, and he's also now has formed a men's ministry called Wingman Ministries. But more importantly, Chad is he believes in investing in people, and he's got a heart for God. I've seen that in him. He's expressed that to me. So it's my great privilege to introduce Chad Hennings. I will say this. Chad has never beaten me in arm wrestling. He was once the strongest guy of the Cowboys, 520 pounds is what he bench pressed, I think, wasn't it?
550.
550, wow.
Don't shortchange me, Jim.
But he's never beat me in arm wrestling. That's because we've never arm wrestled, I guess.
Well, good evening. I'm going to ask you one quick favor to please humor me. I want everybody to stand up, turn to the person next to them, and say, the Dallas Cowboys are my favorite team because fill it in the blank. Just quick. Break it up a little bit. You can go ahead and take a seat. I know a lot of you can probably talk for hours just on that subject alone, right? Just out of curiosity, anybody come up with some doozies out there? No? Okay. Well, maybe because they're going to go to the Super Bowl this next year, right? Yeah. One of the things I do when I speak at different functions, I collect the flyers or the programs. And Jim, I really like what you've done here. These pictures are 23, 24, 25 years old, and they were actually done before Photoshop, and that's actually when I did have hair. I still appreciate that. But, looking at the two pictures there, one of me in the cockpit of an A-10 and the other one of scoring my only NFL touchdown, it's reminiscent of me for two occupations that I've had, two identities that I've had, one as a fighter pilot and one as a professional football player. And those entities have served me well, particularly in certain quote-unquote hostile areas. 2 years ago, I was asked to represent the Dallas Cowboys at the 2012 NFL Draft in New York City. This was an initiative that they had started a couple years prior to this, where they took an alumni from one of the 32 NFL cities. They go to New York and they announce a second or third round draft selection. Well, they flew us all out on a Friday. That Friday evening, we're at a corporate sponsorship deal, and we're watching the first round draft selections go. And this is where, if you've ever seen it on ESPN, where Roger Goodell would walk up to the podium and say, like, the Dallas Cowboys in their first round draft selection chooses number of player, whoever it might be. Well, as I'm watching this, and when it finally came time for the Cowboys' turn to pick, when Roger Goodell, he just gets up and mentions Dallas Cowboys, it was just a plethora of boo, 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 Cowboys suck. Because being that geographical part of the country, general admission, the majority of the fans that were there were the Washington Redskin fans, New York Giant fans, and those perpetually evil, crazy, narcissistic, off-the-wall Philadelphia Eagle fans, right? So I was a little bit nervous about what type of reception I was going to receive the following evening, okay? Well, when it finally came my turn, I was, standing off to the stage, and they began to make the introduction. Your typical introduction, now to announce for the Dallas Cowboys, former defensive tackle, 3-time Super Bowl champion. As I'm starting to walk up onto the stage, they also added Gulf War veteran, former Air Force Academy graduate fighter pilot. And as a matter of fact, as I walked out, I received, that polite, golf clap. Because even cowboy haters can't boo a veteran, right? But anyway, I went back up to, to the podium, and I was thinking to myself, you know what? The veteran thing served me well, so I'm going to put my cowboy hat back on, and I'm going to have some fun with these cowboy haters that were there. So I went up to the podium and I said, for the 82nd pick in the 2012 draft, I kind of paused for effect. And I'm perusing the audience out there, and I kind of just went, America's team. The Dallas Cowboys, like the Ohio State University, the Dallas Cowboys selected was Tyrone Crawford from Boise State. And then I walked off, and everybody just went, boo, boo, Cowboys suck. It was just, thank you. But identity. I want to get into that. Before I get into my message, Jim, I just want to say what an awesome job you did, phenomenal job of casting the vision. As it says in Proverbs 29:18, that where there is no vision, the people perish. And you hit on so many things that if my kids were at a younger age, I'd move here to Tyler just to be a part of what you have going on here. I'll tell you folks, it's unique, it's special. Christian education in and of itself is a phenomenal opportunity for our kids. But when you're talking about the aspects of leadership in the programs, the holistic programs that you do, one of the greatest lessons I think our kids can learn from that is that we are holistic beings. We are Christians. We're not living the segmented Christian life. We are who we are, not just in church on Sunday or at a Christian school, but when we're in the community. We're living out those principles. We understand where we came from a historical Christian worldview. And what you've talked about was phenomenal. The academics, the character, the excellence. And that's what I really want to talk about tonight. When you're talking about leadership, to me, leadership is two facets. Being a leader, and I think everybody is called to be a leader in some capacity, each and every one of us, as you've alluded to. But with that comes the aspect, the foundational principle of identifying who you are as a leader first and foremost. You got to know who you are, where you come from, what you stand for from a foundational philosophical standpoint before you can lead anybody else. And for those of us who profess a belief in Jesus Christ, as you put it, our main goal, our identity is in Christ. We are here to worship him, to make his name known. But when you talk in a secular scenario, when you mention the word identity, a lot of people think about, your identity is in what you do in regards to a living. I was a former fighter pilot, that's who I am. Or I was a former football player, that's who I am. I'm a coach, I'm a teacher, I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'm a dad. But that's not, our identity is not in what we do, but it's in who we are. And who we are is that aspect which you eloquently laid out, are those core values. What do you believe? What do you stand for? Where character comes into play. And I think ultimately it's that aspect of excellence. When you talk about excellence, for me, that's the foundational principle that we all strive. No matter what you do in life, no matter what you do regarding your occupation, it's the excellence that we always strive to do. Excellence in all we do. It's one of the core values or core principles, in the Air Force. Because to me, the pursuit of excellence, it's not a destination. It's a pursuit. It's a process. It doesn't take it necessarily into consideration, or it takes into consideration, but it's not necessarily strictly what you do for a living, or the accomplishments, the things you've been able to achieve, or the things that were your failures, the lessons learned in life. The pursuit of excellence is just that. It's a pursuit. It's taking into consideration those things that make that pursuit of excellence more meaningful, more impactful. Your vision, your core values, your relationships, your character, and ultimately your legacy. We're teaching, the vision that you have cast is teaching our kids that aspect of living a life of legacy. I'll put it in this terms. We're all writing a story. Each and every one of us are writing our life story. And every day we're adding a sentence, a paragraph, a chapter that defines where we take into consideration our thoughts, our words, our actions in regards to living that life of legacy. I so appreciate the quote that says, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, it becomes your behavior. Watch your behavior, it becomes your character. Watch your character, it becomes your legacy. And if our kids can grasp that concept of living a life of excellence or living a life of legacy, we can turn around, our culture, our country. We can impact. We're going to be proactive. We're not going to be reactive. We can go out and be that holistic individuals or the holistic Christians that we are striving to be in our community, in our country, in our world. We can execute the Great Commission. All those things that you laid out, that's what we're here to do. Well, for me, several years ago, I asked myself, I became very introspective when I retired from the Cowboys. And I asked myself a simple question as to why. Why? Why did I do what I did? Up until that time, I was able to achieve and accomplish a lot of different things. I was a star athlete student in high school at the Air Force Academy. I was a 2-time academic All-American, unanimous All-American, Outland Trophy winner, led the nation in sacks my senior year, drafted by the Dallas Cowboys, fulfilled my military commitment, had 45 missions into northern Iraq, flying the awesome A-10 Warthog, the Thunderbolt II. Played for the Dallas Cowboys, 3 Super Bowl championships. But you know what? It was a major trial in my life with the health of my son, where I couldn't control the outcome. That made me realize that a lot of the things that I had accomplished, they were just that. They were things. I was really contemplating that whole aspect of excellence. What does it truly mean to live a life of excellence? You see, the priorities that I started my adult life pursuing, the things that I thought were important for my wife, for my kids, my career, they weren't that important. In fact, they were temporal. They weren't lasting. I was really at a crossroads of trying to determine what is that foundational philosophy for me, that ideal or that metric that I could measure my thoughts, my actions, my words against, that would bring me that meaning, that impact that I was striving to achieve, and not just accomplish things. It was also during this process that I was reading a lot of books. I love to read biographies, historical works. I love to read about politicians, about military leaders, about theologians, individuals who have lived that life of legacy, not that they did it to perfection, but they did it with commitment, with courage, with character. And I think the one book that started this whole process off for me was a book written by a gentleman named Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl was a Jewish Austrian psychiatrist who survived one of the most notorious barbaric concentration camps in World War II, Auschwitz. This was a guy who, all his family, his wife and his parents were all murdered in the camp. Obviously, all his material possessions were stripped from him, and he was basically left with the bare essence of humanity just to survive. But as a psychiatrist and a medical doctor, he made several observations in the camp as to why some people lived and others died. He determined that one of the main reasons why those people that lived was because they had a purpose or meaning to live for. And that purpose or meaning could be something as simple as your faith, your religious belief. It could be something as wanting to live for a loved one, a friend, a spouse, a child, a grandchild, a grandparent. Or it could be something like an emotion, love, or hate. Bottom line, it was something that caused that person to live outside themselves. And on the flip side of that, one of the reasons why those people that died, and many times those that died lived in conditions that weren't as harsh or as barbaric as those that lived. And he determined that one of the reasons why was that they lost their why. It goes along with Nietzsche says that he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. So for us as Christians, what is our why? What is our main purpose? Worship God, to make his name known, to glorify God, to serve him. But for me, it was finally that light bulb went on. You know, hey, played football for 19 years, been hit in the head a few too many times. It takes a while for certain things to sink in. Or, ladies, I'm a guy. Amen? Okay. But there I was contemplating what was my why. Why did I do what I did? What was that aspect of living a life of excellence? What was that all about? You know, not just for me as an individual, but in regards to my relationships as a husband, as a father, as a businessman, as a teammate, as a citizen of our country. Because we exist on essentially two levels, as individuals and as members of a larger component of society. And what's true for one is also true for the other. And that's where I really came to that aspect of what does it mean to live that life of excellence? You know, and in order to do that, particularly as a community, ETCA community, or Tyler community, one of the things that corporately, if you want to live that life of excellence, to be that leader, you kind of all have to be playing off the same game plan. And what do I mean by that? Having that same aspect of vision and core values. What do you hold sacred? What do you hold true? You know, unfortunately today we live in a culture where I believe in universal truths. What's true today is true tomorrow. But it's not so. A lot of people live in a vacuum. Situational ethics, moral relativity. You know, if it feels good today, do it. If it doesn't, who cares? Change your mind tomorrow. But thank God we live in a country where we do have freedoms, predominantly, you know, freedom of choice. We can choose to live a narcissistic, materialistic lifestyle. It's a choice. Or we can choose to follow that path of being a part of something greater than self and serve others. We can choose to be leaders, and leadership is a choice. We can choose to be leaders in our families, in our community, you know, leaders for just ourselves, or we can pitch out of the fight. It's all about choice. And for me, living that life of excellence is just that. It's defining your why, your worldview. Why do you do what you do? And then taking into consideration those things that make that journey more meaningful, more impactful. Those things such as your relationships, your belief, your commitment, your character, and ultimately your legacy. But to do that, it's all aspect about commitment. Because here it is. I believe every one of us here wants to live a life of significance. We want our lives to count. Again, we want to be a part, truly be a part of something greater than self. You know, we want to look back on our lives and say that, you know, we made a difference. It's innate in every one of us. Some people, again, want to fill that inner need of material gain, go after money, fame, social status. But that's a pipeline that you can never satisfy, never fill. Have you ever heard the term or the phrase, I'll be happy when? I'll be happy when I graduate from high school. I'll be happy when I get married. I'll be happy when, you know, we have kids. I'll be happy when the kids leave the house. You know, I'll be happy when I retire. Ultimately, you know, I'll be happy when I'm dead. You know, that's the aspect of that. It's something that can never be truly satisfied. And then on the flip side of that again, most people that can determine that aspect of finding that meaning and purpose in serving others, that's truly living that life of legacy. And again, you have to be committed. You have to be committed to that path, because I believe your commitment and your commitment level are more than just words. It's your thoughts, it's your actions. Again, it defines who you are. Ultimately, it's your core values, it's your character. And to me, commitment, as you've laid out, it's having a plan. It's working that plan. It's about what do you do when things don't necessarily go as planned? What do you do when you hit those proverbial crossroads in life? And the flip side of that is, what do you do when you've accomplished what you set out to do? How do you stay on top? And I really find that if you plan on everything in your life to go smooth, that you're never going to have to navigate those times of trial or turmoil, I mean, you're doomed to fail. You got to be prepared for the ups and downs, the pains and joys that come with living a fulfilled life. A great analogy I like to use as a former pilot, you know, for a jet to take off and fly high in the sky just to get off the ground, it has to go against a headwind. You have to take off into the wind. So in life, for us to soar, to fly, we have to expect adversity in life. But that hones us. That defines us at times who we can be and become. God allows us to be tempted. And that's how we strengthen our faith, is by trusting in him and pursuing that. So for me, commitment. Commitment to me was, Jim alluded to, because of my size, was wanting to fly jets bad enough, even after I was told by the wing flight surgeon where I attended undergraduate pilot training at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, that this guy told me 2 weeks after I was flying the initial jet trainer, the T-37, that the Air Force had to actually go back and check the design specifications of the ejection seat of that plane because they weren't sure if I'd cleared the tail if I ever had to eject out of that, punch out of that plane. That's not a good thing, okay? We'd actually brief, my instructor pilots would brief that if we were in a controlled ejection situation, that we would go to a controlled bailout area. Controlled ejection situation is like a oxymoron for a controlled crash. But we'd go there, we'd roll the aircraft inverted and allow that extra G, the Earth's gravitational force, to pull me out of the plane. Think about that. I'm gonna crash. I better roll upside down and pull the handle. It wasn't gonna happen. Commitment to me was being informed by an Air Force study, the jet that I flew back in a former Cold War scenario, that if the Soviets were ever going to cross from the Fulda Gap from East Germany to West Germany, the life expectancy of an A-10 pilot would have been 15 minutes, because that's how hot that forward edge of the battle area was going to be. Commitment to me was flying on the wing of my flight lead, either in Western Europe or the northern part of Iraq, where you have just 3 feet of wingtip clearance. And you're flying in fingertip formation, flying, and all you can see is a flashing line in his wingtip, top and bottom of his fuselage, as well as in his nose cone, holding that visual picture for hours on end, trusting your flight lead not only to navigate the weather, but to navigate the mountainous terrain, say, of northern Iraq, so you can get to your target area to accomplish your mission. From a football perspective, commitment to me was going through an NFL training camp, either in Austin, Texas, or Wichita Falls, Texas. You guys have lived in Texas long enough where it's 105 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning. You go out, could typically lose 15, 16 pounds of water weight in a 2-hour practice in the morning. And you know you're starting to go down when your eyebrows lock up, right? And I can remember going in the training room, laying on the training table, they stick 2 IVs in my arm to replace the saline solution, the body fluids. And I can remember sitting there thinking to myself, not only fighting the physiological effects of the cramps, but the mental effects of knowing I had to go back out there and do it again for, in 2 to 3 more hours, not just for 4 to 5 days, but for 5 to 6 weeks. That's back when men were men and we actually hit and practiced outside, etc. We don't go to Oxnard and practice on the beach, or we don't play indoor. I'm not bitter at all about what they got now. I'm envious, actually. But just thinking, Jim, I discovered, the archaeologists actually discovered that there was 11th commandment. Did you know that? Thou shalt not play football in Texas in July and August. Well, anyway. And I guess my final example of commitment was reaching out to tackle a 240-pound running back in a Monday night football game against the Washington Redskins. As I'm tackling that 240-pound running back, I got a 320-pound guard tackling me from behind. If you fall in that great heap of human flesh, my right arm is stuck above my head like this. And being the good defensive football players that my teammates were, everybody jumped on the pile because they wanted to get that assisted tackle. As I had about that extra 1,500, 1,600 pounds of body weight, I could feel my lat muscle tear. And it tore to the point where I couldn't raise my arm above parallel, but I couldn't pull myself out of the game because there's nobody behind me. That's back when we were pretty thin on the defensive front to play that position. That's how I try to exemplify commitment in my life. You see, with the lessons that I've learned as a fighter pilot flying A-10s, as a professional athlete, I think even more so as a husband and a father, I've learned a few of those lessons when I've come to those proverbial crossroads in life. To live that life of excellence, to be committed to that, it's basically, and I'll go through these fairly rapidly, 5 points. One aspect is an aspect of vision. And when I talk about vision, people often think about, again, what do you do for your job? Your goals, your aspirations, things you want to achieve. But for me, vision goes beyond that basic tenet of what you do for a living. Vision is about, again, Proverbs 20:19, where there is no vision, the people perish. It's more important to define who you are in that pursuit than actually just define that pursuit. So in essence, again, it's your core values. It's that character piece. If you have a vague vision, your chances of achieving that life of excellence are equally skewed. And when I talk about a vague vision, I'm talking about defining who you are, again, as an individual. You may live that life in a vacuum. If you don't have a foundational principle, a metric, an identity that you pass through all your thoughts, your words, your actions against, again, you live from day to day or time to time, your chances of actually living excellence are equally skewed. But if you have a clearly defined vision as to who you are, those aspects of core values, that commitment, your chances of living that life of excellence are equally skewed. But you got to remember that your vision is not based upon an emotion or a whim. It's set in stone, it's set in concrete. Who you are does not change in pursuit of what you do. It's set in stone, and it takes commitment. I like this story that I think exemplifies this. It's a story about a young man who, his goal, his vision, was that he just wanted to be rich. That's all he thought about 24/7 was money, 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 money. Well, one day he went up to a very wealthy elderly gentleman. He said, "Sir, how did you make your money?" That wealthy elderly gentleman, he kind of stroked his chin, sat back, and he said, "Well, son," it was 1932. He was in the depths of the Great Depression. He said, "I was down to my last nickel." He said, "I took that nickel and I bought an apple. And I spent the whole day polishing that apple. And at the end of the day, I sold that apple for 10 cents. Great capitalistic society in which we live, right? He said, "I took that 10 cents the next day and I bought 2 apples. I spent the whole day polishing both those apples. At the end of the day, I sold them for 20 cents. He said, "I kept that whole process up for a month. And at the end of the month, I accumulated a fortune of $1.37. Then my wife's father died and left me $2 million. The reason I share that story with you, that a vision, again, that is concentrated upon material gain, it's not a lasting vision. I appreciate a quote by Horace Greeley, former newspaper editor, politician, that said that fame is a vapor, celebrity's an accident, riches take wings. Those who cheer you today will curse you tomorrow. The only thing that endures is character. And that's ultimately it. Jim had talked a little bit about my experience. I was drafted by the Dallas Cowboys prior to graduating from the Air Force Academy. But I knew I wanted to serve my military commitment. I gave my word to do that. So playing for the Cowboys truly was never an option for me. And then going through pilot training at Wichita Falls, just an hour and a half outside the Metroplex, in the fall, I would take my buddies, we'd go down, I'd get sideline passes to watch the Cowboys. But this was back when they were 1-15, so it wasn't that painful. But we talked about, my goal, my prize, what I wanted to accomplish was I wanted to become the best fighter pilot that I could be. Playing in the NFL was never an option. Even though emotionally, I questioned, my heart, I wanted to be out there. I wanted to play. I wanted to see if I had, quote unquote, the right stuff. Use it in that analogy of taking it to the next step of competition. But I knew I had a military commitment to serve. And to top it off, I can remember many times where I'm getting ready to step out and fly that T-37 plane. I'm going to the crew van. I got my G suit on, my flight helmet, my publications. I'm getting ready to step out of a crew van, go out the tarmac, crank that jet up, and it'd be, "Hey, Lieutenant Hennings, come here," passing the operations desk. "You got a phone call. It's so-and-so from the Dallas Morning News or so-and-so from whatever sports channel, KVIL, wants to do an interview with you." And sure enough, they want to ask, "Hey, when are you going to get out of your commitment and want to come play for the Cowboys?" And you talk about a distraction. And I think that's where I learned one of the most important lessons in my young professional life. It's all about the vision. Not just in regards to your goals and your aspirations, but defining and setting in concrete who you are as a person, as a leader, as an individual. You give your word. It matters. Vision. Second step is to evaluate. Blaise Pascal is quoted as saying that one must know oneself. If this does not serve to discover truth, it at least serves as a rule of life. What does that mean? Take a personal inventory. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? You build on both. You get your strengths stronger and you limit your weaknesses. But it's during this evaluation process, you got to be honest with yourself, or you're ultimately only going to prolong the inevitable. Now you talk about you as students, the students that are here, you get evaluated, tests. Pass, fail, A, B, C, D, whatnot. Athletics, you get evaluated through your performance. At work, for those of you in the professional and business, you get evaluated by your boss, whatever, on truly what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. But how many of us actually do that same process for our personal relationships? I never did. Why? But again, we're back to that we are holistic beings. So I did this. I was brave enough, guys, to do this once. I asked my wife that question. Honey, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? As you view them. Because we all have a perception of reality as to who we are in the community. Right? Hey, I thought, I'm a good guy, former fighter pilot. I do a lot of stuff in the community. I help out with kids, mentor kids and whatnot. But my wife, in her loving manner, happened to show and point out several blind spots that I had as a husband, as a father, that truly helped me become more holistic and that living that life of excellence that I wanted to strive to be. Now I don't have to ask her. She actively volunteers that information more and more. But you get my drift. So I want to encourage each and every one of you tonight, when you go home, ask your spouse, a loved one, or somebody, a friend that knows you intimately, and ask them that question. How do you view me from a relational standpoint? What are my strengths and what am I? What can I work on? Not only that aspect, but what questions am I not asking you that I need to address in my life? Vision, evaluate. Third area is to train. Again, when you talk about training, working out to improve yourself either on the athletic field or in the classroom or whatnot, but again, we need to train from a character perspective. And how do you do that? Finding mentors. Love what you've done, Jim, for the past few years with your last program with the athletics. Allowing the young men to ask questions about people who have a little wiser, been down the road a little bit farther than them, about what does it take to be a successful, man of God? And what's important about that is that, as you know, mentorship is a two-way street, right? The more you learn from others, the more you get filled by learning from someone that has more wisdom and is wiser than you, the more you give away to those that don't. So as upperclassmen, you're mentoring those middle schoolers. Those middle schoolers are setting the example and mentoring those younger kids. And it's establishing a culture, what you're trying to do, Jim. It's phenomenal. That's awesome. There's one tenet that I wrote about in my book that I share with my kids, and I think it's so important too that I subscribe to in life, that he who walks with wise men will be wise. It's by your friends and your mentors that you're known. So choose your friends, choose your mentors carefully, because it's those relationships that are going to help define who you are. Machiavelli and the Prince even put it better in the fact that there's no better indication of a man's character than by the company that he keeps. It matters. It matters who you hang out with. That was what I'm so appreciative of growing up when I did in Iowa. I'm a farm boy from Iowa. I was so appreciative of just, watching my father, my grandfather. Our family farm has been in our family for over 125 years, watching them work the land. When I got to the Air Force Academy, I sat at the feet of former fighter pilots, individuals who flew missions, hundreds of combat missions in World War II and Korea and Vietnam, actually shot down several MiGs. I can remember one aspect of, he would say to me, my mentor is a former one-star general, he goes, hey Chad, before every mission that we would fly, we would literally pray, which is unfortunately is an odd concept in our military today, being under attack from that whole aspect of the chaplaincy. But he said, we would pray that God, it matters not what happens to me, just let me accomplish my mission. And I always remember that stuck with me. So when I was that flight lead, briefing my flight missions, that's one of the prayers that we would pray. God, it matters not what happens to me, just let me accomplish my mission. And then when I got to the Cowboys, one of the guys that I sought out was Randy White, perennial manster, all-pro, Hall of Fame defensive tackle. And I learned as much that I could from him to get into that starting position, to be that holistic player. So you got to train, vision, evaluate, train. The fourth area is plan. If anybody ever in sales, plan your work your plan. We all have a strategic vision for every one of us about where we want to end up. But life happens, right? The economy changes, downsizing of your corporation, health, relationships, people move in and out of your life. And those are the cause the aspects that sometimes you have to pivot. But ultimately that doesn't change or negate where you want to ultimately end up with your strategic vision. I guarantee you, it's going to be a long process to get to where you want to be. You have the vision, you've cast the strategic vision, but life happens. It may not happen in your timing. Those are the questions I'm going to ask God when I see him when I get to heaven. Why'd this happen? But that's inevitable. That's the adversity that I talked about. But you have to expect that. And that's, all part of it. When I would brief missions as a flight lead, my wingmen would get together 2 hours before our takeoff time, and I would brief every contingency that you could think of, what our call signs were going to be, what frequencies we're going to utilize to communicate to one another, what the weather at our home base as well as the target area is going to be, what the terrain in the target area is like, what assets were we going to go after to destroy. Was it NPCs, tanks, hardened assets, personnel, whatever it might be. What were the bad things, defensive assets that the enemy had that could reach out and touch me, it could hurt me? What happens if one of us, if not both of us, get a mechanical malfunction? Where were our divert bases? What happens if we get shot down? Where are the partisans at, the good guys? All of our combat survival gear. We would brief everything that we could brief to the best of our ability. We'd hop in the jets, take off, we'd fly to an IP point. Military verbiage for initial point. It's a virtual point on the ground, anywhere from 8 to 10 nautical miles away from our intended target area. I'll be flying anywhere from 500 to 1,000 feet above the ground. My wingman, if you can visualize this, 1,000-foot wingtip abreast of me. And we fly in an oval pattern, back and forth. I would get on the radio and I'd talk to a forward air controller or an air liaison officer, a guy in the air or a guy on the ground. He would give me a 5-line or 7-line briefing. This is how cool. Back in the day, the A-10 did have an autopilot, so basically, you're flying everything. Any of you guys play Call of Duty? You're flying the A-10, you can sit on autopilot. But you can imagine flying at 340 knots, right? 500 feet above the ground. You're flying your jet, making sure your wingman is where he's supposed to be, making sure you're supposed to be, making sure there's no bad guys in the area. You're communicating, you're writing this briefing on your canopy, and if I would be distracted for 10 to 15 seconds, hit your clock, 10 to 15 seconds, and I just go 10 to 15 degrees nose low. What's going to happen? Yeah, damn. But unfortunately, there's no reset button, like on the games. You're game over. But so we had to multitask. So if ladies, you ever ask your husband, well, honey, why can't you multitask? It's because we choose not to at times, okay? Only when we want to. But the FAC or the ALO would give me a 5-line or 7-line brief. I'd get a grease pencil on my G suit and I'd write this briefing on my canopy. Lat long coordinates, and it'd go something like this. IP Alpha, series of coordinates, 324 degrees, 7.2 nautical miles, convoy of tanks. Okay, go from there for 345 degrees, 10.2 nautical miles, SA-6, which is a Soviet surface-to-air missile battery. Roger, copy all, reach in my G-suit pocket, pull out a laminated map, lay it on my leg board, reach in my other G-suit pocket, pull out a compass, then I'd go heads down and I'd plot those points. Again, this was back in the old days. They didn't have a computer link that somebody zaps something to you like they have today. But you plot those points. And then when I was done plotting those points, one's ready, to your turn, wingman would go heads down, I'm flying, I'm navigating, making sure he's where he's supposed to be, everything, and I'm memorizing the ingress route. Because again, we didn't have a GPS, we didn't have all this advanced avionics on board, so I basically had to memorize the ingress route. Okay, at the 2-minute point, I'm crossing a road intersection. At the 4-minute point, there's a railroad trestle crossing a bridge. At the 6-minute point, there's a large hill with an antenna, a tower on top of it, and behind that tower is the convoy of tanks nestled in front of a grove of trees. Got it. Put the map back down to my glare shield, my wingman would report back in, and basically as I'm thinking my game plan, everything that I briefed in that pre-flight mission brief, the whole tactical situation changed. In football terminology, I got to call an audible. And it goes something like this: combat trail, shooter, bomber, bravo. Which meant that we're going to depart that IP point. We're going to go inbound to that target area. I'm going to go from 500 feet down to 100 feet. My wingman's flying behind me in a combat trail position, looking through me to the target area. When I get to that tower on top of the hill, I'm exposing myself, popping up, and I can't expose myself for more than 10 to 15 seconds because that SA-6 is in the area. He's going to shoot me down. I find the target, roll in, take that 30mm Gatling gun that the A-10 is known for, depleted uranium tip, high explosive incendiary, 30mm bullets this big, 4,000 rounds a minute, squeeze the trigger for a second, 100 rounds of depleted uranium coming out. Dive back down in the weeds, my wingman would extend, he'd pop up, I tuck his eyes onto the target, he'd drop the heavy ordnance, take out the target, we go to the other IP point, and we do it again, and again, and again. And I think that's where I learned another great lesson regarding life as well as leadership, that the key to air power is flexibility. key to her power is flexibility. So ultimately, if you have a clearly defined vision, you know who you are in relationship in the pursuit of your career, whatever you're doing, your job. You know your strengths and your weaknesses. You've trained, you've been mentored. You have a clearly concise plan, both strategic and you have the ability to adapt. What's left? It's time to execute. It's game day. You've done everything you can to put yourself in a position of success. But the thing about it, I never really knew I had what it took to be a fighter pilot until I flew my first mission. Same token, I never knew what it took to be a professional football player until I ran down the field and delivered that first blow or got blown up myself. Until that time, it was all practice. It was all theory. You know, you got to get off the bench and get into the game. And that's what I appreciate. I'm tired from a cultural standpoint of individuals wanting to talk about the issues all the time. We'll define it, we'll talk about it, but very seldom do we actually engage in the transformational piece. And you've laid a vision for that, and I applaud you for that. You've come a long way in vetting that out. And I'm excited for you for where you're going to go with that. But I'll close with this. You know, true leadership, it takes leadership to, again, to cast a vision, etc. And I appreciate the story that's told about the lion. You all know what the lion is known for, right? The king of the jungle. Well, the lion was so confident of his leadership abilities that one day he went through the jungle and he bypassed all the small animals and he just went up to all the large ones. He wanted to find out and determine that they knew who he was as king of the jungle. So he went up to the bear and he said, "Bear, who's king of the jungle?" That bear, he cowered away and he said, "Why, you are, almighty lion. You're king of the jungle." Ooh. That's right, I'm king of the jungle. The whole jungle floor just shook with his mighty roar. Well, the next animal he went up to was the tiger. He said, "Tiger, who's king of the jungle?" That tiger, he cowered away too, and he said, "Why, you are, almighty lion. You're king of the jungle." Ooh. That's it, I'm king of the jungle. Well, finally he went up to the elephant. And he said, "Elephant, who's king of the jungle?" Well, that elephant picked up that lion in his trunk, you know, boom, 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 flung him around 2 or 3 times, took him up to a nearby tree, banged his head against a tree, and he finally took him up to a nearby lake. Boom, boom, boom. He dumped him in the lake. Then he finally threw him up on the beach. When that lion came to, he looked up at that elephant with bloody, battered, and bruised eyes. He said, "Look, just because you don't know the answer doesn't mean you have to get mean about it." Leadership. Leadership. Again, we are all called to be a leader in some capacity, each and every one of us. And to me, leadership, it is a choice. I think Warren Bennis, business consultant, put it best when he said that leaders are people who do the right thing. Managers are people who do things right. Both roles are crucial, but they differ profoundly. I often observe people in top positions doing the wrong thing well. In other words, before you can lead, you got to learn how to follow. One of the biggest mistakes I see is many times to have too many chiefs in the teepee and not enough warriors. And another aspect of leadership is setting the example. David Cooper, in his book Psychiatry and Anti-Psychiatry, said that perhaps the most central characteristic to authentic leadership is the relinquishing of the impulse to dominate others. Therefore, it's said that a boss, in regards to a leader, boss creates fear. A leader breeds enthusiasm, creates confidence. Bossism creates resentment. Leadership breeds enthusiasm. A boss says I, a leader says we. A boss fixes blame, a leader fixes mistakes. A boss knows how, a leader shows how. Bossism makes work drudgery, leadership makes work interesting. A boss relies on authority, and a leader relies on cooperation. A boss drives, and a leader leads. You know, for you tonight, in your, whatever you do, again, leadership is a choice. You can choose to have that aspect of being a boss or truly being a leader. What is being a leader? It's setting the vision, right? But it's setting the example. I've had squadron commanders that I'd have followed into combat anytime, any place. I've also had those guys that are lucky to get shot in the back when their heads were turned. I've had those coaches that can motivate me to play that extra play. When my lat muscle's torn, I'm so dehydrated to get out there and to continue to play. But I've also had those guys that couldn't, you know, stop, you know, encourage a guy to take a drink of water even though he's severely dehydrated, right? But leadership is a choice. And I'm going to close with this. You know, to be a leader, to do anything in life, if you can't measure it, you might as well not do it. So ultimately, the question I'm going to leave you with tonight is, how do you know if you've achieved, or if you're where you need to be in living that life of excellence? Remember when I started my remarks before, and when I had said that I asked myself that question, why? After I retired from the Cowboys, I truly had an epiphany. I realized that a lot of times my why, my balance, was getting out of whack. I had misprioritized different aspects of my life. Remember I mentioned the thoughts, the words, the actions, and I came up with this philosophy, and I'll cut it off here, Jim. For me, success in that aspect of measuring, it's all about balance, and balance between 4 areas of your life. A physical aspect, taking care of yourselves physically. A mental aspect, leaders or readers, we should strive to learn something new about ourselves, the world around us each and every day. Third area is establishing relationships with family. Getting along with your spouse, your kids, your grandkids, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, because it's that social unit that you fall back on when things don't necessarily go as planned. And the fourth area is community, giving back. And by not letting any one of these 4 areas become dominant in your life. For example, when I was playing for the Cowboys, I couldn't spend all my time at our Valley Ranch practice facility, working out, exercising, and neglect my kids at home. Same token, I couldn't spend all my time at home playing with my kids and neglect opportunities just to get back. It's a balance. But the thing is, my balance for me is different than your balance for you. It's different than your balance for you. And how do you ultimately determine what that balance is? I alluded to it before. When you take it to the ultimate extreme, what is that you value, that you hold sacred? What is your treasure? What are those things that you value the most? What is that worldview that you process you filter all your experiences, your thoughts, your words, your actions through? Ultimately, it's your faith. For me, I'm a Christian. That's what defines who I am, my balance. But it's a personal decision that each and every one of us make either consciously or unconsciously. So ultimately my balance is defined by this, by my faith, by my family, by my country, and by myself. Faith, family, country, self. It's a pleasure being with you tonight. I think I pseudo-accomplished what I wanted to. I kept everybody awake. I know it's getting hot in here, and I'm sweating like I am at Texas Stadium right now, so I'm a little ripe. But I want to encourage you, Jim, I appreciate the vision. I appreciate the aspect of leadership. What you're doing is unique. But what you need is a team around you, individuals to support you, the vision that you, your board, your administration, your operations team, your teachers, everybody, it is unique. And if you want to impact your community, you can't legislate morality. It's got to be done to the next generation. So I encourage you to support, either financially, with your time, your talent, your treasure, because it's worthwhile. It's meaningful. You're not going to see the transition and the fruit of that overnight, but in a generation, you will. There's a quote too that said that what is wisdom is being able to plant a tree and knowing that you're never going to be able to sit underneath it. I paraphrased the crap out of that one, but you get my concept, right? Planting those seeds, planting those trees today. You may not see the fruit of it, but your kids, your grandkids, the next generation, they will. Stakes in the ground, support. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Chad. I really appreciate that. Every time I hear from you, I take something with me. And I just appreciate the impact that you've had on my life, on the lives of others and young men and kids. And just appreciate you coming here and sharing that with us this evening. It was impactful.